In this video, we're going to take a break from writing code and look at style of our code. The first place to start when talking about style in Python code is PEP8. So I'm going to search for PEP8. And the first result should be the page at python.org, and you can see that is the case for me, PEP8 style guide. So I'm going to open that up, and you can see that in fact I have got a PEP8 style guide for Python code. So PEP is a Python enhancement proposal. All changes and new features to the Python language start with a proposal. The proposal is reviewed, discussed, improved if necessary, and then either accepted or rejected. Until 2018, Guido van Rossum made the final decision about whether to implement a PEP or not. Since then, the decision is taken by a group of people. Now you can see who they are by looking at PEP13. So let's just open another tab here. I'm going to paste the link in the resources section as per normal. So as you can see, any changes to Python are made via a PEP, and that includes administrative changes as well as technical ones. Now, scrolling down, we've got this steering committee, current steering council I should say. You may recognise three of the names from the PEP8 page we were just looking at. I'll leave you to read this PEP 0013 if you're interested, and I'll switch back to the PEP8 page now. Alright, so PEP8 was written by Guido van Rossum, Barry Warsaw and Nick Coughlin way back in 2001. They've all been involved with Python for a long time. Guido wrote the first version and a few subsequent ones starting back in 1989. Now, I don't suggest you read all of this document right away. Most of the code examples won't make much sense and you'll find it confusing. I'm going to go through some sections that will make sense. After that, check back in here as you learn more about Python. So the last two paragraphs of the introduction are worth reading. This style guide evolves over time. Python 3 has some features that weren't available in Python 2, and the guide has had to change to deal with new features. The last paragraph is important. If you work on a project that has its own style guide, then that should take precedence over this one. For example, Google have their own Python style guide. If you end up working for Google, then your code should conform to their guide. Alright, so moving down, read through the next section. Foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. So it contains some useful advice on when you should not follow a style guide. Point number 3 is important. Don't change code to make it conform to a certain style when there's no other reason to be changing that code. A simple typing error could break the code and cause all sorts of problems. Unless you're prepared to explain why you broke a major program, such as Google's search engine, just because you didn't like the name of a variable, then don't do it. If you're going to be changing the program anyway, and it's going to be tested afterwards, then you could take the opportunity to clean it up. I'm going to skip as we go down most of this code layout section. That's not because it isn't important, it is, but it contains a lot of Python statements that we haven't seen yet. So moving down to the tabs and spaces section. The recommendation there is to use spaces to indent your code. That's important for programmers from other languages. If you're used to using tabs, then you should use spaces in Python. If you don't, and your IDE is set to use tabs, then you'll get problems on Python 3 when you open code written to use spaces. So next is the maximum line length. Now pay attention to this section. These suggested line lengths are intended for when you edit Python code in a terminal, which is typically 80 characters wide. As you'll see soon, the JetBrains IDEs suggest 120 characters rather than 79. Google suggests a maximum line length of 80 characters with a few exceptions. Stick to 72 characters for comments and docstrings because it's very hard for tools to format them. For this course, I'll generally stick to less than 80 characters for the line length. That makes it easy for you to see the code in the videos and allows the code to display correctly in an ebook. Alright, so moving on, I'm going to skip to the naming conventions section. So the naming conventions section starts with an admission that a lot of the code in the Python libraries are, quote, a bit of a mess, unquote, as far as sticking to the naming conventions. This style guide was written in 2001 and Python had been used for 10 years before this guide was written. When you come to use code from the standard library, which we'll be doing in later videos in the course, you find that many things don't conform to this guide. Don't worry about it. that the developers have read point 3 above, which I talked about earlier in the video, and not changed the style just for the sake of it. We've used variables in our code so far, so let's see what the guide has to say about variable names. And that's specifically, as we go down a little bit further now, in the function and variable name section. Variable names should follow the same convention as function names, which means they should be in lowercase with underscores used to separate words if necessary. Mixed case, which is the convention in languages like Java and C++, should be avoided. Okay, so bookmark this document in your browser and refer back to it as we cover more Python statements in the course. Alright, so back in IntelliJ, you can't actually see it at the moment because of how compressed I've got my screen so that you can see the videos in a good font. But there's a vertical guide in IntelliJ set at 120 characters. Now what I can actually do is I'm going to temporarily just put some long code in here just so we can see it. I'm going to put a hash there for a comment, and I'm just going to paste some code. I keep pasting, and there's the vertical guide that I was talking about. Now obviously you can see we've got some warnings now that I've done that. We've exceeded the 120 characters. So this is basically the vertical guide I'm talking about, currently set to 120 characters. Right, so I'm just going to undo that change, or rather delete that line. Now if you want to conform to the Python style guide, 120 characters is too long. The JetBrains IDEs allow you to change the position of that guide. You can even set more than one, which is useful. So to do that, let's have a look at how to do that. We're going to go into File Settings. Then you need to click on Editor and then Code Style. Now I'm already there, you can see. Now you can see under Visual Guides, I've got nothing in there at the moment, although it does say hard wrap at 120 above that. Now most modern IDEs will have a similar setting. I want comments and doc strings to be no longer than 72 characters and code to stop at 80 characters. So to achieve that, under Visual Guides down here, I'm going to enter 72, 80 in this box and click on OK. And now you can see we've got these faint vertical guides to show us where 72 and 80 characters are. And now I can see it clearly on my screen, so that's good. Now there's still the darker guide at 120 characters which we can't see unless I go back and do what I did earlier, and that's set by that hard wrap at setting which you saw at the top, and you can go back into the settings to change that if you want, but I'll leave that as is. Alright, so what I want to do though is finish this video with a challenge. You need to open up the escape char.py from the previous section, and I've actually copied it into this project, so open that up. Now this doesn't conform to the PEP8 style guide. I don't want you to change the code at the moment. That's because I'm going to show you a safer way of changing it in the next video. Your challenge is simply to identify the things that don't conform to the PEP8 style guide. There are 3 problems with this code which will need changing on 6 lines. But again, don't change them yet, just work out what these things are, the things that don't conform to the PEP8 style guide. I'll go over them and show you a cool way to fix them in the next video.